Inside an Israeli parliamentary committee Monday, some members chant shame, while others trade calls of fascist or traitor. Outside, tens of thousands shout democracy. The uproar Monday comes as the government plans to overhaul the judiciary in a move that is exposing deep and potentially volatile splits within Israeli society. The measure would give Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu greater control of appointments to the bench and weaken the Supreme Court's ability to strike down legislation or rule against the executive. The Knesset Constitution Committee voted to send the first chapter of the plan to the plenum for a first reading. But in a rare intervention, President Isaac Herzog warned in a speech Sunday that the changes come with great risks.
We are long past being in a political argument. Rather, we are on the brink of constitutional and social collapse. We all feel that we are barely a moment away from a collision, and even from a violent collision.
Netanyahu, currently on trial on corruption charges which he denies, says the changes are needed to restore balance in the system and curb activist judges who have overreached their powers to interfere in the political sphere. Critics say the plans risk destroying democratic checks and balances and isolating Israel internationally by weakening the courts, handling unbridled power to the executive, and endangering human rights and civil liberties. Here's opposition leader and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid.
They are pretending that they cannot hear. They pretend that they are not afraid. But they can hear, and they are afraid. We will not hide in the houses as they try to turn the state of Israel into a dark dictatorship and shut us up. They will not shut us up.
Hilla Morzahavi participated in the protest.
I'm protesting for my children, I'm protesting for this country, I'm protesting for the country my father fought for, my brother fought for, my uncle died for. That's what I'm doing here. They fought for Israel to be a democracy, not a fascist country.
Netanyahu's Likud party and its allies have denounced opponents of the proposals as embittered leftists who refuse to accept the results of last year's election that brought one of the most right-wing governments in Israel's history to power. Simcha Rothman is a member of Netanyahu's coalition and the chairman of the Knesset's Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee.
Of course, we said from the beginning, we want to negotiate, we want to have a wider support for the bill, but it takes two, and I hope the opposition, some of the parts of the opposition cannot acknowledge the fact that they lost the election, so they torch down the state of Israel.
But a poll published Sunday by Israel's public broadcaster showed lagging support for the judicial overhaul, with 28% of Israelis supporting the measure as is, while 50% oppose it. U.S. President Joe Biden has urged Netanyahu to build consensus before pushing through far-reaching changes, saying in comments published by the New York Times on Sunday that an independent judiciary was one of the foundations of U.S. and Israeli democracy.
When Benjamin Netanyahu won an unprecedented sixth term as the country's prime minister, it was set to serve in a historic precedent regarding Israel's entire government. Palestinians feared that the new government would also strengthen Israel's hold on the occupied West Bank, as Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition contains far-right parties, including one whose leader was once convicted of anti-Arab racism. When Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted just minutes before midnight, when he won the election, he was quoted as saying, "I have managed to form a government." And the deadline was set by the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog. It will take over from the outgoing center-left caretaker government when it is sworn in. And when Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition partners rejected the idea of a two-state solution to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it intentionally backed formula for peace, which envisages an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank alongside Israel, with Jerusalem as their shared capital. According to Lucy Curtin-Ellenbogen of the United States Institute of Peace, When Benjamin Netanyahu took helm of the Israeli government just 18 months after losing power in the wake of a series of stalemated elections, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's approach to foreign policy and to the conflict with an occupation of the Palestinians is to some extent a known quantity. However, with his comeback and governing coalition dependent on the support and partnership of once fringe extremist parties and politicians, 2023 holds the potential for conflict-driving disruption and, of course, the further debasement and abuse of the Palestinian population. This is the most right-wing and extreme government in Israel's history. It has already brought Israelis to streets and protests and prompted strong statements of concern from former Israeli diplomatic and security officials. Even the current chief of staff of Israel's defense forces has weighed in with security concerns. This is no mere speculative hand-wringing. Those in senior positions of power have been explicit in word and deed about their positions and intentions regarding the Palestinian issue. If Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has in the past flirted with commitment to his two-state future, the opening paragraph of the government's guidelines document, a non-legally binding but public expression of priorities, left no room for ambivalence. Quote, "The Jewish people have an exclusive and inalienable right to all parts of the land of Israel," end quote. The document further includes a commitment to promoting and developing settlement accordingly, to explicitly include the West Bank. This has long been the unequivocal position of certain senior members of the new government. Chief among these personalities are Itamar Ben-Gvir, a routine provocateur and a convicted supporter of terror and inciter of racism against Palestinians. And then there is Bezalel Smotrich, who has consistently called for territorial expansionism and Palestinian Arab expulsion. Ben-Gvir is now the National Security Minister, which is a newly defined role, that gave him policy and priority-setting power over Israel's police operating within Israel, and also a border police unit that operates within the West Bank. Smotrich will be a minister within the Ministry of Defense with authority over policy related to Israel's settlements. Already, coalition agreements have been linked to legalized settlements previously illegal under Israel's own law and to commit to annexation of the West Bank, albeit on no clearly stipulated timeline. Smotrich would come under fire for his regards to liquidating an entire Palestinian town in which the United States saw that it was too extreme and too damaging to the Israeli-U.S. partnership. And so the Biden administration basically ordered Smotrich to retract his statements, in which he did. Beyond the proposal by Justice Minister Yaviv Levine to overhaul the judicial system, if enacted, would include an override clause effectively removing any check on legislative action. Among other interests, this would serve the agenda of those in the governing majority who wish to pursue retroactive legislation of settlements on other steps in the West Bank, such as demolitions, upon which the courts have previously served as a restraint. The dangerous implications for future prospects of resolving the conflict for Jerusalem flashpoints, for West Bank fragility, and for Jewish-Arab citizen relations within the state cannot be overstated. The latter are still nursing wounds from the intercommunal violence of May 2021. Ironically, the violence and residual sense of insecurity among many Israelis from that time did much to boost Ben-Gvir's Jewish Powers Party standing in the elections. This is the case even as in May 2021, Israel's chief of police, Kobi Shabati, explicitly accused Ben-Gvir of serving as a catalyst for the deadly unrest that fanned the flames of such insecurity. And for those relying on Netanyahu's historically cautious foreign policy approach to curb and control the demands and instincts of his coalition's most extreme flank, the early signs, including the ministerial appointments, are not promising. They underscore the extent to which Netanyahu feels beholden to these forces for his political and legal survival, hoping his coalition partners will agree to legislation that will effectively vacate his ongoing corruption trial. Swiftly on the heels of the government swearing in, and in the face of warnings from the United States, the international community, and Israel's own security establishment, Ben-Gvir chose to message his long-stated position that Israel is the owner of the Temple Mount by paying a heavily secured visit to the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. Ben-Gvir's visit was instructive, showing signs of how Netanyahu will have to manage a high-wire balancing act. The visit was brief and conducted on surprise, timing prior to the expected date. Netanyahu has been eager to note that Ben-Gvir's visit was not a departure from the legal and historical status quo arrangement, since the new national security minister visited but didn't pray. But to focus on violent outbreaks on the immediate term absence and as the measure of a government's capacity to impact the conflict trajectory is to miss the much broader point. The statements of intent toward the West Bank and to strengthen the status of Jerusalem are in direct contradiction to the long-standing Palestinian, U.S., and international community position on a two-state political horizon. Indeed, two states is an end goal that the Israeli Prime Minister once ostensibly supported. If this is Israeli government's formal pronouncing the death of a two-state option, Israelis, Palestinians, and the international community alike will be obligated to consider what would come next. And what would come next is everlasting commitment to debasement and violence against the Palestinians, and with Netanyahu's new coalition being the most racist and most extreme right wing in the country's history, the United States has no say in regards to what the Israeli government can or cannot do, but can only act as an unwitting, unwilling to intervene, beholden spouse in this one-way abusive relationship. The United States government is being sold out and bought and paid for by J Street and AIPAC. The Israeli foreign policy guidelines will basically serve as a commitment to the debasement and destruction of a two-state solution and the future of the Palestinians.